Trends live and die. They can live and die in a day. If you can't tie your learning program to a business metric, you're not under-resourced, you're under-aligned. Your solution has to be good enough to learn from, but if it's perfect, it's going to be too late.
What if you could apply the same principles that keep millions scrolling through social media to your learning programs? Today, we're exploring how TikTok is making strides in enterprise learning by moving fast while simultaneously connecting with and being inspired by their vast audience when it comes to learning practices. I'm joined by Nelson James, creator marketing and learning design lead at TikTok, who's going to share how TikTok has cracked the code on agile learning. We'll explore how to keep pace with a culture that never stops innovating, how to engage digital natives, and what it means to be seen in an experience. All of that and more in today's conversation. Nelson, an absolute pleasure to have you here. You and I have had a lot of chats together, and every time I've walked away from our chats, I've always wanted to go, ooh, we should talk about that more. We should certainly talk about that more, particularly on the podcast. So happy to have you here and welcome.
Yeah, no, super excited to be here in the chat a little bit more. I've learned so much from you particularly, so excited to talk about all things learning.
Great. I think I'd be remiss if we didn't start the chat, which is probably what brings a lot of people to this episode, is that you obviously work at a high-profile org and certainly resonant with so many of us in the social media sphere. That is obviously TikTok, and the word that comes to mind for me is pace. And obviously TikTok has a strong reputation for moving at pace, not only in the business world, but even specifically the tech industry. And you and I have always had good conversations about what it means to move at pace. And I guess the starting point for me is, how does a learning team specifically in your role keep up with that pace?
One thing that I'm always thinking about, what defines a good learning experience? Two things that come into my mind is relevant and useful. When you think about social media platforms like TikTok, Instagram, etc., trends live and die. They can live and die in a day. And so to that relevancy piece, right? When you're working for someone like TikTok, in order for you to resonate with your audience, especially if it's an external audience, you have to speak the language of the customer. And in that realm, it's trends. And because trends typically have such a short lifespan, you want to sort of get in on that. You want to be able to resonate with your audience in that way. So when you're thinking about how we have to move fast, it's because it's not a preference. It's like the baseline. You have to design in the same way that your product teams are shipping. It has to be fast, iterative, and audience tested. Instead of having, things that we plan and iterate on for 6 months, we have to drop micro initiatives that allows us to gather a lot of data, adjust fast, and then have that layered impact over a period of time. One of the things that creators always tell me when they're first getting started is that they create a lot of content. They'll post 5-6 videos every single day.
Yeah.
And I was able to learn from that, creators, these videos would have varying amount of views. Nothing was consistent. But in that initial getting started period, it was just it served as a testing ground for them. Because what they got access to was a lot of data about what resonated, what interested the audiences that they were able to build. And I think as learning designers, especially at TikTok, you have to think in the same way, right? You can't be so focused on that high fidelity, highly tested solution. You have to be focused on getting things out there, seeing what resonates, testing and iterating on it. So it's been a learning experience for me as well, because I definitely love when something I love a little high fidelity moment. I love making sure that all the T's have been crossed, but to that point of being completely iterative, that's something that you really have to think about when you're working for TikTok for that reason.
And I think that sometimes as learning teams, we have that assumption. I always like to talk about the myth of the rational learner, where it's we just put the learner on the wall and we think this is this highly motivated individual that we could put our high fidelity pieces in front of and just say, great, this is exactly what I want. Useful, relevant, and I like it, But to your point, relevant and useful is almost a daily metric. I love that concept of, trends today are gone tomorrow, and the business needs to move that way because that's where your customers are moving. And so how do you How do you get that pulse on what is relevant to your people and what is useful to your people? And I guess also managing that with what's relevant to the business and useful to the business.
I think it goes back to a practice that starts from my learnings when I was teaching for middle school for a couple of years. I think a lot of teachers are really, really good at this because when you have a room full of 30, 40 students that all have their own individual lives, it's the perfect ground to sort of test how you have to resonate with them. Like you have to be able to have some sort of shared language. Otherwise, they will not they just won't respond. Being relevant is about getting to know the customer. It's about getting to know the audience. It's the things that creators do so super well. And they have a lot of like data to sort of back that out. We talk about it, or at least like with creators, like they talk about it in the frame of engagement. The way that they're able to sort of like measure their success is things like, I posted this video and it had a higher watch time than another video that I posted that didn't have a high watch time. Or this particular video, I had a lot of interactions or engagements in the comments. I guess to the point about the question about like relevancy, it's about that audience feedback. Sometimes I think like how we leverage and what we can learn from marketing around this idea of generating buzz is sort of like it's like a sustained buzz over a period of time. When you can get to that place where you're developing something that continuously engages an audience, that continuously gets them excited, that gets them talking about it outside of the learning experience itself, that's when you really know that you're being super useful for the customer. And then that transcends into the business, right? Because if I'm getting folks excited and I'm getting them to also be successful, then you're going to see the business metrics and the outputs from that. But I think one of the things that learning teams in the past, like that I've worked with, get wrong is not thinking about that from the foresight. Like we don't think about what the real outputs are. I was speaking with like a client the other day, and they were talking to me about how right now they have this challenge where, you know, they just want to get folks trained and there's no metrics or no sort of output associated with it. But you know, he's saying in the next 6 months, maybe we'll have some sort of revenue goals focused on it. In my perspective, I was like, let's recognize that the revenue is the output, right? Because that can frame how we think about designing the experience. We can design something that can be aspirational and inspirational, but if we want to convert, then we have to think about that conversion in the designing of that experience. And so to be relevant, to be useful, and to also make sure that's the same case for the business is to also go from the foresight and say, we're testing out all of these solutions, but we're doing it with the intention of converting the users to do XYZ.
You mentioned quite a few times sort of marketing tactics that you borrow and bring into your world. And I know you work closely with your marketing team as well, too. What do you think the learning world could really leverage and use that marketing is doing so well? I know you mentioned, obviously, conversion and clear metrics being one of them. Are there any sort of other places of inspiration for you that you feel learning could leverage better?
What I think marketers understand really, really well is their audience. They understand what resonates with them. They understand what drives their interest, and they do a really good job with messaging. I've been working with this marketer on my team who completely has transformed the way that I think about the comm strategy around learning materials, you know, developing a integrated marketing approach that leverages a variety of different channels. I think to the point about what can we leverage from marketing team, one of those strategies would be like the integrated marketing approach. Often learning teams think about learning as being this quick output, this e-learning that we're going to get someone to sit and take for 60 minutes without recognizing that majority of people don't learn from a 60-minute session, but learning is like, you know, think about spaced repetition. It's about like this period of time. It's about accessing them in different channels. Marketing taught me that one output or one solution is never going to appeal to everyone, but rather doing it so over a period of time in different modalities and different forms, that's where you start to see like these ideas of conversion. Like that's where you start to see folks really sort of resonate with the material and then practice and use the material. So it's not anymore about like how do I get someone to understand something in an e-learning. It's now how do I get them to continuously talk about it in our Slack channels? Like how do I get them to open up my email that gives them a quick, 1 minute reinforcement activity? Like how do I like access them where they are, like in the tools that they're using on a daily or a bi-weekly basis, so that like you can establish that culture, the culture of engagement, like extended engagement. Because when you're continuously having these touch points, that's what gets people excited. That's what gets people using the actual material. That's what changes behavior. It's the same thing like with creators, right? Like some of the creators, they come and you can tell that their engagement on their accounts is extremely varied, right? Like they're doing a lot of different things. And whenever creators are asking me about like thoughts or sort of like feedback, the one thing that I tell them is like to go back to what's true, to what got you that like high engagement in the first place. What was it? It really becomes about understanding the customer. And when you understand the customer, you understand the tools and the mechanisms that you can leverage to excite and engage them. And so the more that learning teams are really practicing that marketing practice of getting to know the customer outside of just learning personas, like the tools they're using, the things they're doing, their day to day, the more that you can operate and look like someone that they would want to then participate and engage with that content.
Understanding your audience is also such a dynamic journey. Like you can do sort of learner personas up front if you have the chance, do some focus groups, do some interviews, but you're really just capturing a moment in time. And it's making me think about how do we set up kind of live feedback loops in a way that you're doing with your teams, in a way that your creators are doing with their audiences as well too. It's like, how do I make sure I'm getting the right feedback to make sure that my conversion goals, stay top of mind?
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to pace. Like your solution has to be good enough to learn from, but if it's perfect, it's going to be too late.
Yeah.
The more that you can get things out there, the more that you can see how learners are interacting and engaging with the material, the more information that you're going to have to work with. One of the things that I've learned, at least in my time at TikTok, is the problems that people are facing are typically the same thing. Like the learner journey, people typically go through the same challenges when they're starting, and developing an account on TikTok. The challenges are typically similar, and you learn that over a period of time. So you get to a point where you don't necessarily need to rely so heavily on, learner feedback or the engagement, because over a period of time, you have access to enough data to say that majority of folks at this point in their journey typically are going to experience XYZ things. But that happens over time. And the only way that you're able to really understand how folks are resonating and if it's proving value is if you're putting enough pieces out there to get the feedback on. But I can talk about something that I did at TikTok that resonated, but it was honestly too late. We did this talk show. It was called TikTok, where it was supposed to be an awareness campaign centered around like policy violations. And it also had this interactive H5 piece where once we got them with the video, they would be able to go through and look at this H5 page that kind of detailed the policy a little bit more. It had some questions, etc. What we didn't think about the talk show at the time, this was a time where on TikTok, talk shows were going, they were really, really popular. But in the process of quite literally scripting out that series, producing the content, getting it edited, going through approvals, the talk show trend was 5 weeks away. And so we came way too late. Like we tried to make something perfect through the rounds of revisions and approvals that it got too late. So for me, it's like it's a practical considerations too that you have to think about in your ability to turn and churn out content that people want to engage with. And in the ways that they also want to engage with them, which I think is incredibly important, which might not be a learning management system. is thinking through like what are some of the realities around your situation? Like how many approvers do you have on this content? Like how many execs want to see this? Like do we have extensive comm strategies centered around this? Like what I love about TikTok is like there's such in the way and the reasons I think that like people resonate with it so well is because it feels so authentic. It feels so personable. It doesn't feel curated. It doesn't feel like marketing traditional marketing content. Um the more that you are trying to aim for that perfect, you're always going to be too late. And it doesn't resonate, especially when you think about like the new generations that are coming into the workforce now.
Well, you teed me up perfectly, actually, for where I wanted us to go to next, because obviously, and I say this as someone who feels tremendously old these days, you take you have the platform that is definitely the place for culture right now. And it is where young people are, and specifically in relation to at least my day-to-day job, I'm obsessed with people's relationship with TikTok, specifically young people, those that are entering the workforce or are about to enter the workforce, and how it shapes their view of the world and how it shapes their view of work, to be honest. And, you and I have had a couple of chats about, what it means to engage this audience. And you spend a lot of time with this audience because they're not just your target audience, but they're your customer when you think about it. And without delving too much into generational stereotypes, because I don't know if there's too much weight in that, but I'd love to know your perspective on what makes today's youth, those that are entering the workforce or just new to the workforce, what makes them unique? What works for them? What are they looking for out of learning, training?
Yeah, I guess to that point about not going into generational sort of stereotypes, I think the same could be true for all generations. Whereas I don't think that folks have a short attention span. I think that we just have a high bullshit detector. And if your content isn't relevant in 5 seconds, I'm not going to engage with it. Um, what's really interesting about like TikTok, and when I think about the ideas of like personalization, right? Like personalization isn't just a preference anymore. It's an expectation. They want to feel seen in the content. And I think what TikTok does really well is like the For You page is as if you're the main character, right? Like this is all content that you're super, super excited about, right? You have the choice to engage with something or the choice to not engage with it. I often talk about it in the frame of like communities, right? Like I think of it in a problem solution way, right? Like imagine I'm a black man and I have like curly hair and I travel a lot for work. And so, the type of creators that I'm following, right? They're also black men with curly hair that also travel. And so they're also using products that I would naturally be using in because we have a similar problem and you're offering a solution. Like I think that's a practice where you get that's how you resonate with your audience. That's like how you get up behind that, like ahead of that attention span, is because it's super relevant. Like it's speaking to you in a way that you understand. It's being real about the scenarios, the circumstances that you're experiencing. And I think the same could be true for everyone. Like personalization is it has to be reactive, real time, and identity aware. And the more that you can do those things, the better that you can really resonate with this generation, but with all generations, because everyone wants to be seen. They want to feel like we're participating in something. No one wants to be preached to.
There's something deeply human about personalization that I think we need to get right, which is an interesting conversation, I think, here, because obviously so much of what informs personalization is in the data, right? It's like you're trying, preaching to the choir here, but you've got a really slick algorithm that understands personalization inside and out. But there's something very deeply human about understanding what really resonates with me versus kind of giving me a veneer of personalization. And I wonder, and putting you on the spot here with quite a tough question, but what could we do to make people feel like the experience is all about them?
One of the things that I recently led was actually an event for Juneteenth.
Yeah.
And this event, we had a lot of data and feedback on how previous events might have got it wrong, in terms of the relationship between a brand and a creator. And it goes back to that like same hair story, right? Like if I know what my needs are, like as an individual, I know what my needs are, I know what my problems are. I'm gonna look for a brand that sort of supports that. And so we did this Juneteenth event that was sort of centered around we want to connect specifically Black creators with Black owned brands that are solving problems that these Black creators are having that their audiences are also having. And by doing that, right, like we were able to see not only was the event, the experience itself, like that connectivity, resonated really well with the creators, but it also became an event where you could sort of feel the culture in the room. Like you could feel sort of the
Yeah.
relevancy in the ways that people engage with each other or the conversations that we have. It was intentional, it was purposeful, like it was meticulously designed to do that, right? To really tap into that community. And so often what I'm talking about in these when I'm talking about like personalization, it's about like it's again, it goes back to that fundamental of audience and community building work that takes a long it's really hard work to build a community, but you learn how to do that really well as a teacher. And if we only think of solutions as these 60-minute butts and seats opportunities, you'll never really build a community of learners. You'll never really be able to personalize and design experiences that are relevant for them because you don't understand them. And you only understand them through listening and working with them over a period of time. So I guess what I say to that is like let's take what we're knowing from creators is that like the more that you understand the audience, the more that you understand how they're interacting and engaging with the materials, the better like your solution will be and the more that you'll have the opportunity to actually build that community.
You're so right in terms of they're not they're not different rules. I think sometimes we think about, sure, obviously that works in a social media space because that's entertainment, because that potentially niche content, because, I know exactly what I'm looking for and I know the people to go to in order to get that. Sure. But I think in the business world, the same rules can apply. And when I think about actually how you start building community and certainly doing it in a digital way, because that feels quite practical, certainly in our hybrid working world, there's also something very selfish for us in terms of getting the right feedback. When we started off this conversation, we were talking about authenticity, we were talking about relevance, we were talking about utility. And I know that for so many, getting the right data is just a struggle. And there's something very selfish about creating formal avenues for community and conversation where you just listen in on that conversation. All of a sudden, you've just got a ton of feedback for where you need to go next and what it's looking for. And so use that as almost like a selfish analog way to get really rich data for you if you're lacking, data in that environment. So
hmm Yeah, I definitely agree. I think to that point about data, right? And what you get from working, building that community and sort of, knowing where to go is like you then get to be really intentional about what it is that you're doing and also focus your efforts, right? Like, most learning teams are like under resourced, right? But you can also if you can't tie your learning program to a business metric, you're not under resourced, you're under aligned. You can be completely you have to be really intentional about what it is that you're doing, what you're focusing on. What is it that you're, resourcing your team against and the goals that they have. I think a lot of teams that I've worked with are very much like, let's just get it done. Let's and take a request and do it just for the sake of doing it. But the way that if you're building a community programs, which is another area of expertise, if you're now like thinking about like marketing, right? And you're thinking about how to sort of like, get this information out there and build excitement and engagement. These are different layers of expertise and cross-functional work working together that does take more time, but they also have wider impact. Um, so to that point, you have to be critical about the problems that you decide to take on as a learning team and make sure that they're aligned to that North Star goal.
it sounds like you've really, and not surprisingly, are really tapped into what the business is trying to accomplish. I know for some people that feels uh, out of reach, or it feels like it's out of bounds. What advice would you have for people that are trying to get closer to the business, that are trying to your point, and I love the way that you said about it, not being under-resourced, but, under-aligned. What's your advice for someone who's trying to get that alignment with the business, but, just are being treated like an order taker instead? How would you try to build momentum to tap into what the business really matters?
Learning has often had this tension. There are business units that have like a direct input on revenue. And it's a lot more clear cut. But when we go to learning,
Yeah.
we think about, we have all of these complex formulas, and it's not really clear like what the ROI on this investment could look like. The one thing that I had to learn how to do, and advice that I've offered to folks, is really like getting outside of your own team. It's something you actually shared with me a while ago. Communicating about learning without actually using the word learning is
Sounds like something I would say.
yeah, it's really it was something that I had to do to be able to really like work with folks that had no background on what it is that I was doing, because they just didn't understand it. But by doing that, right, like you were able to like diagnose their problems and what their needs are, and start to like employ things like systems thinking to really understand and kind of dive deep into like what are challenges that these other business units are experiencing, what are their KPIs, what are their metrics of success, so that you can do a better job at building a narrative around the impact of your work. We can acknowledge that it's true that like learning has sometimes has a directional impact on the things that we're doing. It might not be as like clear cut unless you have access to a ton of data, and you have resources to do that. But I think what we need to do a better job as learning folks is like being able to tell a better narrative. And the only way you're able to tell a better narrative is if you understand what are the challenges that these business units that are attached to the revenue goals, what they're experiencing, and then framing the challenge in a way that they understand. I don't think there's data out there, there's resources out there. It's just like you have to be willing to build that narrative, and to do it in a way that sometimes might look a little bit differently than how you've been able to do it. It's my perspective that I really think that organizations and businesses are going to have to rely on learning teams a lot more to drive the goals that they have, because learning has such a incredible impact on the culture of the folks and the employees and the customers that you're servicing. You get more innovative products, more innovative features when you have a really strong learning culture. You get better transparency, you get better alignment, you get more excitement, more engagement when folks understand and know how to use your product and can advocate on it. Learning to me is incredibly important. But if we as learning professionals are unwilling to talk in a language that they understand and want to sound like we have a PhD from somewhere, then it's not going to allow us to be able to have that impact.
There's something so critical to what we do that is I don't even want to say underappreciated, because that sounds a little bit self-indulgent, but almost underutilized, to your point about how do we unlock that extra layer of performance? How do we really get people to buy into it? When you're asking people to be innovative, what are the conditions we need to create in order to do that? And it all ties to that secret word that we're not going to mention, but it definitely is, a contributing factor. So just really, really powerful comments in there. Nelson, I know that I've taken a lot of your time, but we do like to end on one question, because I think it's a good way to just kind of tie everything together. We have a tagline here. It is unforgettable learning. And we always like to ask anyone who comes on the podcast, what does unforgettable learning mean to you?
I think for me, unforgettable learning is when you feel seen in the content, like it was something that was made for them. And if I did my job right, they don't just remember the lesson, they remember how it made them feel. And the perfect example I have of that is the Juneteenth event, which you wouldn't even consider as a typical sort of like learning solution in the frame of like an e-learning. But I still to this day have had creators email or send me a text saying, thank you for creating a space where we felt seen and valued. It's that problem solution, right? Like it's having someone feel seen in their work or having it feel like it was made for them means that you're acknowledging what the problem was in the first place. And then you're offering a perspective on what the solution can be, not dictating it, not preaching it, but allowing them the space to take that information, interpret it, and apply it in a way that's relevant to their own unique needs and circumstance.
Nelson, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been fantastic to hear about how TikTok is managing learning and change. You're right. Probably the most powerful one is how it makes us feel.
Yeah, thank you. It was nice to chat.
Thanks for tuning in. If you haven't already, join our subscriber list to be the first to receive new episodes of the Unforgettable Learning Podcast and all the other goodies we've got lined up for you.